manifesto for 21st century peoplehood. Through a combination of personal stories, insights from some of the world's greatest teachers, and contemporary analysis, Why Do Jewish takes one of our oldest wisdom traditions and provides an accessible guide for anyone looking for answers to life's most important questions. The format of today's program will allow participants to see the featured speakers, but not other participants. During the program, you could submit comments or questions to the speakers through the chat feature or question answer feature located on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. Stephen will be fielding questions throughout the interview. This program will be recorded. Zack Bodner is a seeker, writer, storyteller, community organizer, and above all else, a doer. In his role as the CEO of the Ashen Family, JCC, the organization created the Center for Social Impact, which is committed to helping repair the world through initiatives that address poverty, disaster relief, racial justice, civic responsibility, and more. Zack also oversaw the launch of the Taub Center for Jewish Peoplehood, which hosts the Architects of the Jewish Future series and the Kol Isha Women's Leadership Development Program. Additionally, under Zack's leadership, the OFJCC created the annual Zionism 3.0 conference, which became the Z3 Project, a global effort to reimagine diaspora-Israel relations. It's an honor to introduce Stephen Shalowitz. Stephen is the host of Jewish National Fund USA's Israel Cast podcast and the One Way Ticket Show podcast. He is a JNF USA New York board member and on JNF USA's social media committee, and invites you to connect with him all on social media at Stephen Shalowitz. Looking forward to discussing the book tonight. Stephen and Zack, thank you. I now turn the program over to you.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Sarah. And Zack, welcome to our reading series. Our November reading series. We started this during lockdown, and it's been such a success that we decided to continue with it, and we'll be doing them quarterly next year. So thanks for joining us on this one. We have so many bases to cover with your book, Why Do Jewish? A fascinating read, and it really provoked a lot of thoughts, certainly in my mind. And before we begin with our questioning and so on, I just want to welcome everyone that's joining us right now. And again, as Sarah said, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I'll do my level best to get to all of them, or at least as many as I can. And also, we'll be going for just about an hour. So our conversation will be just about 60 minutes or so. Zack, listen, before we dive into the book, I just want to ask you about Zionism, because Jewish National Fund USA has launched a whole year-long campaign called Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's a whole year-long campaign, as I said, to really talk about the inspiration and the beauty of Zionism and really what Zionism is all about. And I'm just wondering if we can just start out by asking you what Zionism means to you and how Zionism plays into your daily life.
For sure. Thanks, Stephen. And thank you for having me. To you, Stephen, to Sarah Cohen, to JNF. I'm a huge fan and have been for a long, long time of the Jewish National Fund. I think they're doing incredible work in the land of Israel, in the diaspora, and we are all, as a Jewish people, better and luckier and more blessed to have JNF's work. So thank you, Stephen.
And we see your blue box right behind you.
My little push key back. Thank you. But yeah, Zionism, look, it's an important part of my life. It always has been. I love that JNF is going out big and bold with the word Zionism, not shying away from it. It's a really sad thing to me that the word Zionism has become tainted by our adversaries out there. To me, Zionism is about Jewish self-actualization. It's about self-determination in our biblical and historic homeland, in the land of Israel. It's about figuring out what we are and who we are as a people. I think it was Leon Pinsker who talked about it in terms of auto-emancipation. But Zionism is a core part of who I am. It's a core part of my family and our values. And today, I think Zionism is at a new phase. And we could talk a little bit about what that means, Stephen, but I think that it still needs to be a core part of Jewish peoplehood and is an important part of our values today. But I know it is for me, and I think it is for most of the people on this call.
Right. Well said. Well, I do want to direct all of our listeners that are joining us this evening and this afternoon, if they're on the West Coast, or this morning, because we have some that are joining us even from Asia, to go to youtube.com/ or slash Zionism Studios. Once again, youtube.com/Zionism Studios to hear some of these really, really powerful and wonderful and enlightening conversations. All right, now listen, let's get on to the book right now. Once again, Why Do Jewish? Before anything, can you just define what Judaism is? Because we always have listeners with varying degrees of understanding of what Judaism is all about, because you certainly articulated what Judaism is in terms of 1, 2, 3, in terms of 5 buckets.
Yeah.
I have them written right in front of me on a little Post-it note. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, it is. It's a multiple choice test, as you say, Stephen. Is it Judaism? Is it a religion? Is it a nationality? Is it a moral code? Is it a value system, an ethnicity? I think the answer is it's all of the above and it's none of the above, right? At the end of the day, that's why as Jews, we have such a hard time explaining this to non-Jews. That's why I choose the terminology of Jewish peoplehood. We're a people at the end of the day, because it is so big and broad. It encapsulates culture, it encapsulates some rituals, it encapsulates language and food and art, it encapsulates tradition and heritage and legacy and future and destiny. All of that is a part of what it means to be or do Jewish today. And it's funny because when Avram Infeld was international president of Hillel, he would go around to different communities and would ask them, put it in a box. What do you think of when you think of Judaism? What do you counter it with? Is it about Christianity? Is it about Islam? Or is it about, well, the Russians would say, no, that means you're Georgian, you're Jewish, you're Russian, right? Like, so they would see it as more of an ethnicity. And Jews in Latin America would say, I don't even understand the question, right? So it's a totally different thing depending on where you are in some ways. But it's, in my mind, it's a peoplehood. It's a people.
Right. In the book, you said it's a religion, a nationality, a moral code, and a culture. So it's all that, all wrapped into one. Now, let me ask you, to whom did you write the book for? Because you say it's for the non-Orthodox community. And why are you writing at this particular time? In other words, Zach, what was the need that you really saw in putting this book together?
Yeah, I wrote it for a lot of different audiences, Stephen. And primarily, I wrote it for myself, actually. I wrote it for myself, my kids, my family, my future grandkids, God willing, one day. But I think it's a book that is going to resonate with anybody who's searching for questions, answers to the big questions in life, searching for a way to make Jewish life meaningful, relevant, and joyous today. It's for those people who kind of have this memory that, oh, I know that there was something so good there. I remember there's a nostalgia in it. Those folks are like, oh, I remember my grandmother's kugel or whatever it is. And it's also for those Jewish leaders, the communal leaders who are seeing their institutional affiliation dropping. And they're saying, how do I help make Jewish life more relevant for those folks, right? But for starters, I wrote it for myself, Stephen. I realized, like, I have to be able to answer this question for myself, as I think we all do. Why do Jewish? Why is this thing so important that we want to hold on to it? We want to carry it on, the tradition, for our kids and our grandkids. So I had all these thoughts swimming around in my head for years, Stephen, and I felt like I had to get them down on paper. I had to make sense of it. And I had to answer for myself primarily the question, why do I do Jewish? Why is it so important to me? And in terms of now, I mean, like, I do think that we're at this inflection point in Jewish life and Jewish people. And I feel like we're on the eve of a transitional moment to a new era in Jewish peoplehood, right? In the book, I talk about it in terms of this 4th era of Jewish peoplehood, right? The first era, the Mishkan period, where we're a wandering people and our holiness is going with us. The second period is when we settle back in the homeland, we build the temple, it's destroyed, build the second temple, but the temple becomes the center of our Jewish life. And all of our Jewishness is defined around the priesthood, the temple, animal sacrifice, making pilgrimage multiple times a year to Israel. Then the second temple is destroyed, we're dispersed, we become a diaspora people. And that's basically the Judaism we've been living for 2,000 years. But now, for the last 100, 200 years or so, there's been a major change happening. And in this moment, we're starting to see things in Jewish peoplehood that are going to look a lot different in the next 100 years. Basically, our grandparents did Jewish, Stephen, yours and my grandparents did Jewish a lot differently than we do. And our grandkids are going to do it a lot differently. So this moment in time also provoked me to say, let's figure out what this is going to look like, a vision for the next era of Jewish peoplehood.
Yeah, I want to talk about that notion, though, of continuity in terms of keeping up with, halacha, because halachically speaking, if you're following halacha, then how we're living today is the same as the way my grandparents and great-grandparents lived, right, in many respects. So let's put that aside for the moment, because you did talk about 5 meta trends that are driving change right now. You just hinted at the dropping institutional affiliation. And before we get to those 5 meta trends and the dropping of the institutional affiliation, talk about the difference then between being Jewish, why be Jewish, and why do Jewish? Because I think there's an important distinction to be had there.
I do too. I do too. I think that if this thing, that we call Jewish is so important to us, we should be able to keep doing it, to carry it on, to pass it on, no matter who we choose to spend the rest of our lives with, right? And I'll tell you a quick story that I actually do include in the book, that we have a member of our board of directors at the JCC here in Palo Alto. She's a Japanese woman. She lovingly calls herself the Japanese shiksa. Those are her term for herself. She's not Jewish. She didn't convert to Judaism. Her husband's the Jewish one, but she's the one who's taking her kids to the JCC preschool. She's the one now schlepping her oldest to bar mitzvah lessons. She's the one that makes Shabbos dinner every week. She makes an incredible Passover Seder, by the way, with these wonderful Japanese undertones. And she's the one, by the way, leading our community mission to Israel this summer. She is doing Jewish. And in my mind, she's part of our mishpacha. She's part of our family. In my mind, that's the sort of thing that matters most. It's the doing. You know, Mordechai Kaplan used to talk about the 3 B's. You can identify, right, whether you're Jewish with the belonging, the behaving, or the believing. Belonging was, okay, you're just born of a Jewish mother, so you're part of us no matter what you do. The believing is, do you take on the trappings and the beliefs of Jews, right? Is that part of your Weltanschauung, your belief system? And then the behaving is a lot like what I talk about in terms of the doing. And in my mind, Stephen, that's what really matters. What are we going to do that shows that we're Jewish? And there's many ways that we can do that. And I know we're going to dive into that conversation, but it's about the Tachles. It's about the doing. I really hate this term when people are like, oh, it's the thought that counts. You know, well, Stephen, it was your birthday the other day and I forgot to call, but I was thinking about you. And you try to make me feel better by going, don't worry about it, Zach. It's the thought that counts. But no, like, make a little effort. It's the doing. It's not about just thinking about it. The doing is what really matters. And in my mind, doing Jewish is going to define the future of our Jewish peoplehood.
Well, Judaism is very much a religion or a movement of action. It's not just about a movement of feeling. Right. And that's a whole separate conversation, because I think there are a lot of people that say, well, I feel Jewish. Well, that's nice. You know, I feel a lot of things, but it's, right, what you do, it's what you do with it, right? It's like education. It's what you're doing with the education and how you're moving the needle forward in this world. Okay, so let's just real briefly then take off those 5 meta trends, which you say are driving change in the Jewish world. And just in the interest of time, we'll just go through each one of them rather quickly. The first one is what you just hinted at, is the dropping of institutional affiliation. And if you can just talk about that real briefly.
Right. The old legacy institutions, the big synagogues, federations, JCCs, the ones that were defining what Jewish life looked like for the last 100 years or so. According to the Pew study and the data out there, there's actually dropping affiliation with these mega institutions. Now, it doesn't mean that Jewish life is dropping away, because there's a sprouting up of some really cool young things happening. But the mega institutions, the overwhelming trend is that the affiliation is dropping. So who's going to define the future of Jewish peoplehood if not for those organizations, Stephen?
Yeah, one of the questions that I had when I was reading that was, and I'm wondering if you can answer this, what happens at seminaries and what happens when rabbinical students finally get smicha, or even right before? Are there those conversations with them to say, hey, you know, being a pulpit rabbi requires a number of very important skills. It's not only being a real Torah scholar, which I think they should be, but it's how do you inspire? How do you speak to people? How do you lead? How do you raise money? How do you bring people together? And, you know, Shlomo or Shlomit, right, you know, you just don't have it, right? Are those conversations happening? Because at the end of the day, for me, that's where the rubber hits the road. I was sharing with you yesterday the 2 synagogues that I belong to here in New York City. And one of the big reasons why I belong to each one of them are for the rabbis, because I adore hearing them speak. Right. And that's really a highlight for me. And I take with me everything that they have to say, but they're also very competent in terms of creating this community and also fundraising and doing all those things that a rabbi really needs to do. So what are those conversations like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have not gone through rabbinical school, although I considered it for a long time. So I haven't.
Told me.
been the recipient of those conversations, but I imagine they are happening. I would hope they're happening. I think that the training, to your point, is happening on each of these different facets. There's a recognition amongst the leadership in these rabbinical schools that rabbis have to be everything to a community, right? In the old days, the rabbi just had to be the legal scholar. And now, one of my teachers was Rabbi Lee Beisel, who was running Hebrew Union College for a while in Los Angeles. And he actually did his PhD work on this idea of when it shifted, when the idea of the rabbinate shifted from being about being legal scholarship to being about a calling, right? There's a lot of these men of the cloth in multiple religions feel called by God or by whatever to come to this as part of their profession, but it's a calling. And there is the recognition, I believe, in the rabbinical schools, Stephen, that rabbis have to be so much. They have to be the counselors. They have to be the people who can be at someone's bedside as they're dying and for their families. They do have to be the motivational speaker. They have to be, ideally, they have a partner and an executive director that does with the P&Ls and does the business side, but not all of them. But to your point, I think the synagogues that are doing well, and a lot of them are the independent minyanim, are the ones where the rabbis are charismatic, they're inspiring, they're young, they're not just following the track. They're willing to kind of go off path. They're willing to break some glass along the way. And they're willing to kind of do things that are going to take that next generation and get them really fired up. And so they're not necessarily going to affiliate with the big movements in the same old way, but they are making an impact with this next generation.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, because again, I think, look, I love to sing, but it's not like Beyonce is going to hire me as a backup, right? I mean, so.
Maybe,
well,
I don't know. I haven't heard
maybe.
You sing, but maybe.
Okay, well, maybe we'll do that after the call's over. Listen, so the second meta trend I just want to tick off here is this whole notion of shifting Jewish ethnography. And you already hinted at it when you referenced your Japanese congregant or Japanese member of the JCC over there.
Right. And I think that what we're seeing now is I can speak for myself as having been raised with a very Ashken normative perspective, right? When I thought of Jewish food, and I wanted to open a Jewish cafe at the JCC when I came here, I thought, oh, of course, we're going to have pastrami and kugel and knish and matzo ball soup. And, half of my community was super psyched when they heard we were going to have Jewish food at the cafe. And they're like, yeah, you're going to have hummus and falafel and Israeli salad, right? Because there's so many Israelis in the Silicon Valley. So it just kind of has humbled me and made me aware that there's a whole nother experience out there. And in the old world, it was like you were Sephardic or you were Ashkenazi. But now there are Indian Jews, there are Asian Jews, there are African-American Jews. And when I saw that image, the JNF image that you guys had up scrolling before you brought us on, Stephen, you have the imagery of Jews from around the globe. And so it's not just that they spoke Yiddish or Ladino. There were so many other languages, so many other foods. And when we take that seriously and we recognize that our people are made up with this just vast, beautiful mosaic, it means that the future is going to look a lot different, again, than what it did for the last 100 years when we talked about Jewish culture. It was a little bit more homogeneous, I think, for the last 100 years. But going forward, it's going to look a lot different because our eyes have been opened to, there are a lot of different Jewish experiences out there.
Yeah, I want to come back to that if we have time. But I do want to move on because another meta trend that you talked about was Israel and diaspora relations. And it was interesting because you said for the first time we have a strong diaspora and we have a strong Israel, and that's happening at the same time. Whereas before.
That's right. This is the first time ever in Jewish history where both have existed. We've had one or the other. And I think that what's unfortunately happening, and you know this, and JNF is on the cutting edge of trying to repair this, but there's a rift happening between diaspora Jewry and Israel in some parts of our community because people are defining their relationship with each other based on the areas where they have disagreement, right? And many American Jews today are defining their entire relationship with Israel based on like the Palestinians and the chief rabbinate, two areas where they have disagreement, opposed to all the other incredible parts of Israel that we love and we know. And meanwhile, Israelis are looking at American Jews going, you're not even going to be Jewish in a generation, assimilation, anti-Semitism, intermarriage. Why should we even bother investing? So we're talking past each other. And this idea of having these two strong centers of Jewish life that are not going to recognize that we are brothers and sisters is scary to me, right? It's terrifying, actually. And we have to find a way to move past our differences, to transcend them. And I'm talking about unity, not uniformity. We've never agreed, Stephen, you know this, right? It's, since Jacob and Esau, since the Sadducees and the Pharisees, since Hillel and Shammai, who couldn't even agree on how to light Hanukkah candles. I mean, the Irgun and the Haganah were killing each other, right? We're not about agreeing, but we're about recognizing that we are still part of one family. When I think about how we were involved in saving the Soviet Jews, we went in to rescue Soviet Jews, and we said, we didn't care if they were communists or capitalists, if they were Orthodox or secular. It didn't matter. They were just part of our family. And we said, we're going to embrace you, we're going to love you, we're going to hug you, and we're going to help you. And we have to get back to that moment. And in this moment of Israel-diaspora relations having friction, being a little scratchy, is something that is going to change for the next 20, 50, 100 years. And that's something we have to take seriously.
All right. And then the fourth meta trend is broadened search for meaning and belonging. And I'm wondering if you can talk to that as well, because I've also seen that, a lot of people, they want to find themselves and they want to be able to connect and they want to, be enriched spiritually and emotionally and all the rest. And I think that for some, the synagogues have not been doing it, and they find other avenues for that, or Judaism hasn't been doing that. And I'm wondering if you can address that.
Yeah, for sure. Look, they used to most people would get their sense of community, their sense of connection, their sense of meaning and purpose from the synagogue or the mosque or the church. And now we've seen that people can get it from a soul cycle class. They can get it from a yoga group, a book club. People are getting it from a Burning Man experience, the Burning Man festival that's out in the desert. People, that's where they find their sense of kesher, their sense of kahila, their sense of community connection, which gives them a sense of meaning in life. And if people are finding that outside of the traditional venues, how do we pivot? How do we become, we in the established Jewish community, how do we become there for them? How do we meet them where they are so that we can become sources of inspiration, sources of connection, sources of meaning? Because they're not coming to us if they're not going to get it from us. So how do we create that when they're going to get it from some other place? We can, bring the mountain to Moses, as it were. And that's the opportunity that presents itself in this next era.
And I want to come back to that point as well, because I think that dovetails into the notion of how are we educating and what are we educating people on when it comes to Judaism. And then the final meta trend that you talked about was the evolution of technology and science. And
Right.
Can you just real briefly address that?
Yeah, I mean, the rapid pace of technology and science changing everything. We can't even begin to predict what tomorrow is going to look like because of what's been made available and being made available to us. We've over, the last couple thousand years, we've adapted, but a little bit slowly to changes. We have an eruv that allows us to carry on Shabbat. We have a Shabbos elevator that allows us to travel in an elevator on Shabbat. But imagine a time, Stephen, when, and it's not so far off, that there's going to be a self-driving car. And can you jump in a self-driving car on Shabbos, right? That imagine a time when they can, and they're talking about this, being able to make bacon from a cloned pig. And maybe because it's a cloned pig, that makes it kosher. Imagine when the Oculus, when the virtual reality goggles become so advanced that we can all stand at the base of Sinai and be a part of Revelation, or we can all witness a pogrom. Like, imagine how life will change. And by the way, not always for the positive, right? These are some things I'm talking about that might be positive. We've seen how Zoom has changed our ability to congregate and come together in a positive way, but some of it's going to go dark as well, right? This at-home DNA testing could lead to a place where people are trying to identify the Jewish gene, and therefore, do you have it or do you not? And what does that mean, right? I could see that going in a bad place, but I'll just tell you a quick story to illustrate my point, Stephen. But we have an individual in our community here who grew up in an observant family in New York, came out as gay, and came to Northern California, where he felt that he would have a more accepting environment, a more accepting community. It was a little rough for him back in his home community in New York. And when he got here, he fell in love with a Hindu man. And then at some point, he wanted to re-engage with his culture. And he wanted deep, authentic Judaism. And so, at first he kind of went to study Talmud, and he went to dive in with an Orthodox congregation, but they weren't necessarily as embracing of his lifestyle and his partner. So then he went and found a Reform congregation, which was much more accepting of his lifestyle. But then he kind of was like, well, I want something a little bit more deep and meaningful. So he came to us and he found us, and we have a wonderful learning program that allows them to go deep. We partner with organizations like Hartman, with 929, Bina, Pardes, wonderful learning institutions. And he started learning in an environment with us. And he just fell in love with the community. He fell in love with the and then meanwhile, COVID hits, of course, Stephen. So we have to go online. So what happens is he reaches out to his mother and he says, look, I'd like you to participate. It's an online experience, so there's kind of a natural mechitza. You don't have to worry, but join the session, see for yourself how legit it is. It's really authentic. And so she did, she agreed. She said, okay, there was enough of a separation that she started Zooming into the learning sessions and was blown away by how deep and authentic the Jewish learning was in this. And through that, she was able to rekindle a relationship with her son. And the two of them have now rejuvenated their relationship. And that's how technology can serve a wonderful purpose in a way that we didn't even think about, right? That's just an example of how if we embrace the gifts of science and technology, it could be really good for the future of Jewish peoplehood.
Zack, I'm very positive. I'm very optimistic. And then the flip side is one of the concerns, at least that I have, is that people will say, you know what, I'm just going to go to services on Zoom. I'm not going to go back to the synagogue.
Right.
And so they're going to look at a service while they're checking their phone, or they're going to go to the kitchen and on, and they're not engaged. And I think the beauty of Judaism in the synagogue experience is to bring people physically together, because there's something that, we are social creatures and we just need that. So that's one of the big concerns. And I think that we really need to watch out for that. Before we move on, first of all, Cheryl, thank you for the kind comment. Terrific and thought-provoking. Wow. So congrats to you, Zack, for that. And then IJ Gross asked, Steve, how do you handle attending 2 temples at the same time? Well, what I do
Zoom screens, right? Stephen, you have 2 Zoom screens open at once?
I have 2 Zoom screens. There you go. I go to 2 different synagogues. And what I do is my main one is on the east. I live on the west side. My main one is on the east side. I go there for all the Chagim and for Shabbat. And then the other one I'll go to on Friday nights. And then also I love to go to the Rabbi's Thursday night class. So that's how I'm engaged with 2 different synagogues. So thank you for the question. And if anyone has more questions for Zack or yours truly, just put them in the chat. Moving on right now, Zack. So you said in the book, and I'm sure you remember writing this, we must find new ways to inspire the next generation to see their Jewish identity as something they couldn't possibly live without. Again, because there are a lot of people that are falling to the wayside, right? And they're not embracing their Judaism. My first question is, who is the we when you say we must find? And then is it not up to the parents, because it really all starts in the home? And how do you get the parents and grandparents to wake up to this and to change their own lives first and to serve as role models for the kids? Because that to me is so incredibly key. As we spoke yesterday in our pre-conversation, I lived in Singapore for many years, and that's real galut. And when I lived in China, that's even more galut during those days. This was pre-Chabad. But yet I saw families that were Jewish, and they had kids that were Jewish engaged. They were, embracing their Judaism. They were embracing Zionism in Israel because the parents did. So Can you talk to that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point, is that we, as the parents, as the grandparents, as the friends, as community leaders, we, the hundreds of people who are on this call, Stephen, and taking time out to be a part of this and not watch Tiger King tonight. We're the ones who have the responsibility to make sure that this is being passed on. Those of us who care about this are the ones who have the responsibility. So we have to self-identify and stand up, and kind of, it's a hineni moment, right? But I'll share another quick story for you. Sure. But when I was in high school, I had a friend who was Jewish who showed up with a non-Jewish girlfriend. And his father flipped out on him, just kind of flipped out. And then this was a friend who wasn't very Jewish. If we're using that terminology, I don't like to use that, but he wasn't very observant. Let me, be more accurate with my nomenclature. I remember actually at Yom Kippur that he went to services. He came home and he had a ham and cheese sandwich afterwards, which is fine. I don't begrudge anybody. I don't keep strictly kosher. I kind of keep kosher in the house, but outside the house, a little bit more liberal on that. I remember a time when my father, who didn't eat shellfish, but also had his own way of keeping kosher, Stephen. He was kosher in the house. He'd call it kosher. So outside the house, somehow pepperoni pizza became kosher, right? But he still never ate shellfish. We went to a restaurant once and he ordered the lobster bisque. And I remember we all looked at him because we knew he didn't eat shellfish. And he quickly said to the waiter, but hold the lobster. And the waiter was like, but sir, it's the lobster bisque. What do you mean? He said, oh, that little lobster garnish on top? You can leave that off, right? So I don't begrudge anyone their kashrut practices, and we all kind of draw our lines in different places. But this friend of mine who ate the ham and cheese sandwich on Yom Kippur, when he came home with a non-Jewish girlfriend, his father ripped into him. This was like a shalom aleichem. This was a tevya moment. I thought he was going to tear the clothing, right? And I just didn't understand it, Stephen. I thought, like, what's the hypocrisy here? This is obviously a father who never took the time to share with his kid why being Jewish mattered, why doing Jewish mattered, right? If he's so laissez-faire about it, that there was no attachment to Israel, there was no doing the holidays, there was no, like, and again, fine, if that's what you are and who you are, again, no judgment, but then don't rip into your kid when he brings home a non-Jewish girlfriend, because as I said before, this should be about something so meaningful to you that you want to keep doing it no matter who you spend the rest of your life with, right? So it's incumbent upon my friend's father and mother and his grandparents to then, yes, answer that question of how do we ensure the next generation is inspired to keep doing this if it's important to us. And if it's not, okay, well, that's also fine.
Where are we failing then with education? And that's what I want to kind of go into right now, because, for those people that are spiritually trying to find themselves, my gosh, there's 3,000 years of Jewish thought that you can delve into, but they don't. And also for those people that are going through life cycle points, for example, sitting Shiva. Sadly, I had to sit Shiva. Both my parents passed away. And so I had to sit for both of them. My dad's was the full 7 days. My mom's, interestingly, was only a day and a half because she passed away right before Shavuot. So Shiva was cut short, but I was with people because I was going to the synagogue for Shavuot. And so that kind of fulfilled a certain need. But when I hear people say, well, we're just sitting for 2 days, I think to myself, the rabbis over the ages have perfected this whole notion of Jewish mourning. And there's a reason why we do this. I don't know where it's getting lost in translation. I don't know if these people that are having funerals for their loved ones, the rabbis just say, well, do what you want, or it's up to the individual. But there is so much there that people can draw from, but they're not. And it just boggles the mind why they're not doing that. And I'm wondering if you can just address that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know, but I'll give you a hypothesis on it. I feel like for some people it's hard, right? For some people it's hard. It takes time. You have to invest the time to learn, right? And this is learning.
But it's not a question, I have to interrupt you there, but it's not a question of learning per se. It's a question of, as I told you yesterday, a friend of mine's father passed away, I think on a Monday. I spoke to him on a Friday. This was in Chicago. And he said he was driving to a concert, and they're Jewish, they observe the holidays to some degree and so on. And I'm thinking to myself, did not a rabbi say, hey, you shouldn't be out in public, at least for your first 7, you shouldn't be out in public for your first year, but at least for your first 7 days, at least for Shloshim, right. Music ignites certain emotions and you don't want to be around there, and on and on and on. So I don't know where this breakdown is happening. It's not that someone has to study it, but who's not giving them the message?
Look, that's an actual easier answer for me. And the answer is it's not relevant to your friend. Judaism has ceased to be relevant, right? He has not found the meaning in it that gives himself joy, his family joy. So why would he do it? Like, in his mind, he did what he was supposed to do as a son. He buried his father. He probably said Kaddish at the graveside. And why would I do this? Look, you and I are not dressed like our Orthodox, Chabad Orthodox brothers and sisters, with the black hat and the payas, and that, because that is not relevant to us today. We have decided we want to embrace our Jewishness, Stephen, differently than they're embracing their Jewishness. So for this other friend of yours, clearly the Jewish environment that he is in, he has not found any meaning or relevance today. So he's like, well, why should I do it? It doesn't make sense. And I don't blame him. Like, if you leave the snowy, cold New York, as maybe one day you will, and you'll come to nice, warm California, right? Like, you're going to leave your winter coat back in New York. Maybe you'll keep it here for the trips to Tahoe or whatever, but why wear the winter coat if it becomes irrelevant? You don't need it anymore. And so in his mind, Judaism is kind of this anachronistic, archaic thing that may have worked for his parents and his grandparents, but now it's just like, these are all the things I can't do. I can't turn on the lights on Shabbat. I can't eat bacon, and I like bacon. I can't drive. So he hasn't found the deeper layer of meaning of saying, this is why the mourning period, the Shiva and the Shloshim, this is why it's so good for us and our soul, and it's so healing. He hasn't found it that way. So he's like, why bother? And again, I'm not faulting him. I'm
Mhm.
faulting us who are leaders in the community who haven't made it relevant and meaningful and joyous for him that way. So that's what we have to change is how we connect with people. You know, when I was growing up, I was forced to go to Hebrew school, Stephen, and it was like after school, I was exhausted. All I wanted to do was run around with my friends and play. It was hot in Southern California, multiple days a week. And like, you forced me through it because this is what Jews did. My parents went through it, so I had to go through it, right? Like, at what point are we going to say, all right, we need a new model for Hebrew schools? It's, you know, some of them are doing great. By the way, some synagogues are doing great, but those who are just kind of doing it because that's just what we do generation to generation, we need to be thoughtful about breaking that model.
Yeah, I guess the point that I was just trying to make was that not from a holistic Jewish point of view, but just a one particular situation. It's like saying to someone, you know, I think you should give your son, you should have a bris for your son, or I think, you know what I mean? It's those points in time, but you know, let's just move on. And I just want to say to all of our dear listeners, because someone said that I should let you do more of the talking, that I'm doing the talking. But you know what? This book really, I don't know who, I'd love to hear who's read the book, because it really, really provoked a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that I wanted to ask you about. So anyway, so that's why I'm very animated, especially with this book. So in any event, so I just want to move on though, because one of the things that you did talk about towards the end of the book, of course, is this notion, and you just referenced it, was Tachles, okay? Yeah. And the paradigm of Tachles. And I want you to take us through, first of all, what's the definition of Tachles, and then what each one of those stands for.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I don't mind.
Try not to interrupt you, because someone said I was interrupting too much.
This is how Jews talk. This is how we engage. We step on each other's words, and it's
exactly
right. It's
listen, if you've ever been around a Jewish Shabbos table or any other table.
Right. And I married
this is our virtual table. You were talking about technology.
Virtual table. I married into an Israeli family, which is a whole nother level of talking over and engaging. And my wife is from her parents, her father's Greek Saloniki Jew. Her mother's like an old school Ashkenazi. It's like a whole other level, Stephen. So
you need a bullhorn, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're teaching our kids how to stand up for themselves when just having a Shabbos dinner. Okay, so look,
Tachles. Let's talk. Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know what Tachles means, and then what it all means.
Yeah, let's talk Tachles. So Tachles is one of my favorite all-time terms. It's a Yiddish word. It's been adopted into modern Hebrew. There's no English equivalent, but it means like getting down to business, getting down to brass tacks. It's like when you're sitting in a conversation in a meeting and there's just too much talking. You're like, you could say to somebody, "No, what's the Tachles?" Like, let's get down to business, guys. Come on, enough talking. We Jews are very good at that, right? So that's what it means. And what I've done is I've taken the word and I've turned it into an acronym for how to frame doing Jewish for this next 10, 20, 100 years or more. I think that if people engage in one or more of these 7 ways of seven's a nice Jewish number, 7 ways of doing Jewish, they can have potentially a fulfilling, meaningful Jewish journey in a Jewish life. So the T is tikkun olam, which means repairing the world, right? It's a part of our kishkas, our neshama, to make the world a better place. And I don't believe we have to be doing this just with overtly Jewish causes. It's great to get involved with JNF, and everyone on this call is or should be more involved with JNF, but you can also be involved in, racial justice, in social justice, in poverty issues. You can be involved in so many other ways of making the world a better place, that recognizing it's coming from your Jewish neshama is a part of doing Jewish. And the young people really attach themselves to this. Tikkun olam is an important way for them to show their Jewishness. The A is art and culture.
I interrupt you with tikkun olam. We hear a lot about it, but what people don't really understand is that it's tikkun olam for the sake of bringing on Mashiach. Yeah. Right? They just stop when it comes to tikkun olam because it makes me feel good to go work at an animal shelter. And God bless those people. I love animals myself, but they don't really realize what's the real outcome for tikkun olam. Okay, go ahead.
Right. And in that way, it doesn't necessarily mean literally the Mashiach. It means making the world a better place so that we're ready for that time when, right, the Mashiach could get, right? So that's how I think about it spiritually. So the A in Tachles is for art and culture, right? So many of us connect to our Jewishness through art and culture, whether that is, a Chagall painting or whether that's our food. I actually get offended when people call someone a bagels and lox Jew, like it's derogatory. They're looking down on them like, oh, their only way of connecting their Jewishness is through food. I think food and culture and music is a really easy portal of entry. People who read Philip Roth and Saul Bellow, and that's their connection to their Jewishness, that's great. That's an early, easy, low barrier to entry. It's a lot less scary than saying, oh, you want to do Daf Yomi with me and study Talmud, Stephen? Like, no. I'd rather just read some, listen to Sarah Silverman comedy. And okay, that's a portal of entry that we should see as very legitimate, and it's a part of our history. That's the A. The C in Tachles is community. As you said, there's something to meeting in person, right? You can't dance the hora on a Zoom call. You can't lift me up in a chair on a Zoom call. Like being in community, that's what we do well. I think it's the first or second commandment in the Torah where God says it's not good for humans to be alone. We pray in a minyan, we study in chevruta. That's the C. The H is holidays and rituals. Again, we do holidays and rituals really well. And Jews should recognize that if they're going to do Jewish, you should see the calendar, the week, the annual time, and also kind of over a life cycle. What are the moments that we want to mark? How do we want to make something profane holy? And people can pick and choose. In the book, I kind of give 12 options, kind of one a month. It's kind of like the basics. I'm not diving into like, okay, it's time for you, Stephen, to deal with the fast of Gedalia. You don't have to start there. You could just go, okay, how am I going to make Sukkot meaningful for my family right now? Right? So that's the H. The L is learning. Learning is so important. We are the people of the book for a reason. And I'm talking about learning Torah and Talmud, but I'm also talking about learning the modern Jewish canon. I'm talking about being able to deepen our sense of why we do this, so that in this era of DIY, do-it-yourself Judaism, people will understand how to do it. And I think that's the L. The I is Israel in Tachles, right? We've talked a little bit about that. I can go into more detail, but just for the sake of getting through this, the S is Shabbat and spirituality. And I really think that Shabbat and spirituality is an important part of doing Jewish.
And can you give Ahad Am's quote about Shabbat?
Yeah. I love this quote from Ahad Am, who said, it's not so much that the Jewish people have kept Shabbat as that Shabbat has kept the Jewish people, right? I think Shabbat is the greatest religious invention of all time. This idea of kind of, and I don't keep Shomer Shabbos, right? But for me, it's about finding a way to relax, reset, unplug. It's like Abraham Joshua Heschel talking about a cathedral in time, right? This book, 24/6 by Tiffany Schlein, is brilliant because she talks about a tech-free Shabbat. She's recognized in our modern moment, how do we unplug? And I live in the digital epicenter of the world. And I was finding during COVID that my wife and I had a joke. Are we working from home or are we living at work, right? Because everything blended in together. And I just needed this differentiator, this moment of separation. And I think that's the blessing of Shabbat.
And my recommendation to everybody that wants to bring people more into the Jewish fold is invite them over for a Shabbat dinner and tell them what Shabbat is all about. It's about being together with family, friends, truly unplugging and truly having person-to-person physical time, and also having a wonderful meal, conversation, etc. That's really the beauty of Shabbat, and really a physical day of rest as well. Well, listen, we have a number of comments and questions in the chat. So let's go to that right now.
Sure.
The first one is, and I'm going to, let's see what we have here. Rosie wants to ask you, do you feel that classicism is a factor within Jewish belonging?
I think it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely think in some communities, it's expensive, and I would say too expensive. It's a barrier to being Jewish, right? Whether it's membership to a congregation, or whether it's membership to a JCC, or whether it's a Jewish day school experience. I think it can be very, very expensive to be Jewish in some of our communities, which can lead to classism. But I think that's a shame. That's chaval, and it's on us to change that. And I think community leaders need to come together and recognize that if we're pricing people out, if it's leading to a first and second class citizen status, then something's broken, right? One of my friends and mentors out here is a woman named Anita Friedman. She's the executive director of Jewish Family and Children's Services out here, Stephen. And she's always reminding me that there are a lot of Jews in need in our community. A lot of Jews who are, unfortunately, Shoah survivors. A lot of Jews who are living below the poverty level, especially in the Bay Area, where it's such an expensive place to live. And we need to be looking out for them as well, right? So yes, unfortunately, classism can play into it. We're not unique as a people that way, but it speaks to us as Jews to be able to help raise up everybody in our community, right? And we have to give to those in our own community first. It's like the Hillel quote: if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when? Yeah, we have to be looking out for our peeps.
All right, there's a bunch of other questions. Shirley Stern asks, can you speak to how, this is a great question, can you speak to how politics has been how politics has been replaced religion, or how politics replaced religion, I guess is the question.
Yeah, it really has. I feel like,
And talk about what Jonathan Sachs said about that.
yeah, I think that the recognition that polarization in our community is having a detrimental effect. I really believe that, as we're seeing in some of our communities, there's now Democratic shoals and Republican shoals, right? There's organizations where people love Trump and organizations where people hate Trump. Like we're seeing this division in a way that's dividing us as a people. And the politics is replacing the religiosity at a certain place. And I think we need to create more spaces where we're open to different points of view. The definition of community, in my mind, is being able to hold in our hands differing opinions. Like we said at the Shabbos table or Passover Seder table, Stephen, we have to be able to engage with each other and have these difficult conversations and argue and fight and recognize we're not going to agree. We never have, but that's okay. So as soon as we start saying, I don't even want to see that person, I don't even want to talk to that person, Micah Goodman, I'll quote Micah Goodman because Sachs I can quote all day long from the book, but right now in my mind, there's this Micah Goodman, who's from the Shalom Hartman Institute, who's an incredible scholar, talks about how we've gone from this place of where we used to disagree with people and say their opinion was wrong, to now we're in a place where we say the person is wrong. The person is wrong because of their opinion. That change has happened over the last 15 years, and he has some interesting data to support that. And that's dangerous. When we start saying that people are wrong, as opposed to their decisions, their opinions, their politics are wrong, that's a big jump. And that's really dangerous for us in the future, I think.
All right. Cynthia writes in, Zack, my copy of your book came today. I think you may be living in my head. So far, the book answers questions I didn't know I had. So many of us need to hear your words. Thank you. So that comes from Cynthia Gunther. Thanks for that, Cynthia. And then we already answered Shirley's question. And let me just go down the list here.
As you're looking for a question, I'll just say, Stephen, that yes, the book just shipped out from Amazon today. I apologize for the delay. It was a supply chain issue, Stephen.
Here's one question. I had a similar question. Anonymous wanted to ask, please address people who identify as ethical Jews and how that fits into your behaving construct.
Ethical Jews.
This is right. She wrote ethical Jews. That's what I have here. I don't know if it meant ethnic Jews or ethical Jews.
I think that that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that. And admittedly, this book has been a very, and the book tour and the book talks have been a very humbling experience. I realize that, just as people say, you've seen one JCC, you've seen one JCC. It's not like you've seen one, you've seen them all. It's just the opposite. And I don't think I can speak on behalf of anyone other than myself. I have a little bit of a perch here in Silicon Valley, but when I say this is a manifesto for, 21st century Jewish peoplehood, it doesn't pretend to speak on behalf of all diaspora Jewry, all world Jewry, all American Jewry, all North American Jewry. I'm involved with a number of different organizations, including JCC Global, where I'm constantly being educated and reminded that I only know what I know, and I have to be open-minded. So an ethical Jew is not someone I've encountered, so I can't speak to that question. I will tell you, I have a number of families in this community who consider themselves very ethical, whether it's because of their Jewish background or not, who come from an intermarriage. And I'll just share a quick story about one of these families who, it's kind of the opposite story I told of the woman who's Japanese in my community, Stephen, who the woman is Jewish. She cares deeply about passing the Jewishness on to her kids. Her husband's not Jewish. He didn't convert, and he doesn't feel comfortable in a synagogue because he doesn't understand Hebrew, right? So he's kind of like, you do it if that's what's important to you. She sent her kids to a JCC preschool and loved that we did the Shabbat and the holidays, loved the challah, loved just the feelings and the ruach that was there. And she calls me in tears and says, her kids are now in 1st and 2nd grade and they just had a Passover Seder. And she was in tears because she's like, they forgot the 4 questions. These are the basics, She's like, help me. What can I do? The kids now go to public school, right? And she sees Jewish life as being something so rich with heritage, with tradition, and with the ethics and the values. And that's why her husband is so in favor of her passing this on. So maybe that's an ethical Jew. I don't know, Stephen, but I know that we have, again, we owe it to ourselves to figure out how to embrace these families and help them keep doing Jewish when it means so much to them.
Yeah. And, you point out in the book that there are all these organizations that are helping Jews on their journeys. And you do point to Chabad. And I will say, I have to give a shout out to Chabad because they don't care if you are what level of Judaism you have, what kind of practice you have. They say, if you're a Jew, we want to help you along our spiritual journey. And I think that's the way it should be. Larry and Kathy write in to ask you, do you feel that the Reform movement has led to a decrease in observance of things like Shiva and Shabbos?
It's a good question. I don't think that that I can say that the Reform movement has led to a decrease. I think that the Reform movement led to making Jewish life more accessible. It was created at a moment in time when people saw their Jewishness as a religion, right, and solely a religion. And when in the late 1800s, when Reform Judaism was founded, it was about kind of shifting when we would go to synagogue from Saturdays to Sundays. It was shifting some of the cultures, the traditions, right? But the big hachams in the Reform movement, the big rabbis, the Rick Jacobs out there, are very, very thoughtful about Jewish tradition, about halakha, about how to make modern American life, and even life in Israel, because the Reform movement is taking off a little bit more in Israel, how to make it interwoven with today's culture, right? It's a very hard task to connect the tradition with the future and the innovation. And I think that the thoughtful leaders in the Reform movement are trying to find ways to do that. And so the people who are just saying, I'm going to write this off, it's too hard, or I don't want to learn about it, or it's irrelevant to me, right? They're the ones who are dropping off from doing the rituals of Shiva and Shabbos, not the leaders in the Reform movement. They're the ones who are trying to be thoughtful about how to make it meaningful today.
Yeah, because there's a big distinction, because I have some friends that say, I'm Reform. And I say, you're not Reform, you're just not practicing.
That's right.
They use that as the default. And so that's how you think. This is a question for Sarah, because Terry writes in this interview has been so informative and inspiring. Thank you for that. All due to Zack, of course. Is there any way we can get a copy of this recording and share it? Sarah is going to answer that in the chat. So we just have a couple minutes left. And one of the things that you talk about, are guardrails, and that we have to change the guardrails. And we only literally have like about 5 minutes, and I want to get a couple other points in, but like, I don't understand that, because who's changing the guardrails? And once you start changing the guardrails, at least in my mind, you go down a very slippery slope. And then when does it become something that's not Judaism anymore?
That's right. That's right. And I don't have the definitive answer for this question. This is a big one, Stephen. This is a tough one, right? You made the analogy of like when you and I were talking the other day about playing tennis and who was redrawing the lines on the court. And I would say to you, it's not you and I'm moving over to pickleball, because that's a little bit more relevant to me than tennis these days, right? So that's what's going to happen. If the guardrails don't shift a little bit, we're going to be losing people. And some would say that's okay. That's okay. But I would say, like, we have to find ways to get creative. We as a people have for years, for centuries, for millennia, been creative as we've thought about how we've evolved. In my mind, Jewish peoplehood is not a static thing, just like Zionism is not a static thing. And just as I mentioned the Eruv and the Shabbos elevator, and I know in Israel, Bezik was talking about creating a Shabbos telephone. There's a tech company out there that's talking about making a Shabbat observant keyboard so that the current is constantly going, so you're not creating the current or tapping. There are going to be ways that we get very, very creative with moving the guardrails. And there are going to be some people who say, that's just not going to work for me. Rabbi B'nai Lappe talks about this idea of a sociological crash. She says, when your worldview hits up against a wall because something gets flipped on its head, think about like, when the world was flat and then people realized, no, the world is round. Like your world, three things can happen. Either one, you drop it all together and you say, whoa, I've been in the dark. This is totally wrong. I'm adapting to a new way. I'm dropping all my old ways. Or two, you can double down on the old ways. You can become even more traditional, more orthodox. You can put up walls, like the ultra orthodox, like don't look at a TV, don't look at the internet. That's the second way. And the third way is to innovate, to get creative, to find a way to mash things up, which is hard. And that's moving the guardrails, Stephen. That's where we have to be creative. We have to be thoughtful. We're going to bump into people who disagree with us, but that's okay. That's part of the responsa. The Talmud was the first at doing this, right? We've actually codified the guardrails changing and bumping up and moving against each other. And the Rambam says this, and Rashi says that, and the Ramban said that. Like that's testing the guardrails.
Yeah, again, this is only my opinion. I agree with you there. I think part of the difference is in terms of the degree in the things that we're talking about. I mean, you know, if you can create that fake bacon, look, I'm vegan and I know that I can have, you know, tempeh that is going to taste like pork. But I say, but I'm not going to eat that because it's the spirit of, right? So I think, you know, we're dealing with very, very different things, I think, from many of those things that were in the Talmud. But point taken is that I think that there are technological advances right now that cause people to ask questions. Can I or can't I? Can't I work around them, or how can I at least work around them? Listen, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I'd really like to take it offline with you because you know, I promised I try to be a man of my word, and I said we were going to go for about an hour, and it's an hour in 60 seconds or so. So in any event, once again, I just want to tell everybody just a couple of things. So nobody leave yet, because I do have an announcement. Again, the book, Why Do Jewish? There's some really thought-provoking things in this book.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for creating those thought-provoking thoughts in the book. And everyone can get it wherever they like to buy their books. And I just want to let everybody know that on December 15th, please mark your calendars. I love it when people are asking questions up the wazoo here. Our next book, drumroll please, is called Sacred Days by Rabbi Hanan Pupko, who, apart from this being an amazing book, Rabbi Hanan Pupko is a very dear friend. He is one of the smartest, funniest, most humble people that I know. He has real yichus. He comes from a whole line of top-notch rabbis. He, in fact, received the highest level of rabbinic ordination that there is, and that's on December 15th. And then next year, in 2022, we are going to do this every quarter. Okay, we're going to do this every quarter versus every month. And so hopefully people will be able to get the books well in advance and to be able to read all the books and to join us for all that. So we just want to thank everybody once again for joining us. I wish everybody, and you, Zack, and everybody in wonderful California, where I have to make it out to before too long, a very, very happy Thanksgiving, a very happy Hanukkah, a happy secular New Year. But in the meantime, we'll see everybody hopefully B'ezrat Hashem on December 15th again for this next book, Sacred Days. Wish everyone sacred days. Thanks so much, Zack, for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you, Sarah. Thank all of my friends at JNF.
All right. Take it easy, everybody, and so long.
Okay.
Bye.